Code Gray, West Wing. Code Gray, West Wing.
There is a particular kind of silence that exists only in the small hours of the morning. It's not the quiet of sleep. It's a hollow, waiting silence, punctuated by the hum of fluorescent lights and the soft, mechanical breath of machinery. It's in this space, between midnight and dawn, where the rules of the world seem to soften, where the line between the living and the dead, between clinical reality and primal fear, becomes dangerously thin. What if the very corridors of healing become a labyrinth of dread? What if your duty to care for the vulnerable makes you the most vulnerable person in the room? The stories you are about to hear do not come from campfire tales or fictional films. They are documented, investigated, and corroborated. This is Verified Nightmare, where every story is verified. According to internal hospital incident reports, declassified OSHA investigations, and first-hand testimony from medical professionals, what happens on the night shift often defies medical explanation. Tonight, we document 11 cases, 11 instances where nurses trained, skeptical, and dedicated encountered something that would permanently alter their understanding of reality. These are 11 terrifying night shift nurse horror stories that actually happen. The medical field operates on verification. So do we. What you will hear is supported by police records, patient charts, and in some cases, physical evidence that remains unexplained to this day. This is not about ghosts in the traditional sense. It is about violations of protocol, of physics, and of the fundamental contract of safety within a hospital's walls. Hit subscribe and tap the notification bell now, because what you're about to hear will change the way you listen to the silence of your own home, and make you profoundly grateful for the daylight. Our first story begins in a small regional hospital in the Midwest, with a woman named Anya Petrova. The patient in room 307. Anya Petrova was a 48-year-old charge nurse with 22 years of experience, 16 of them on the night shift at Cedar Ridge Community Hospital. She was known for her impeccable notes, her calm demeanor during codes, and her ritual of drinking 1 cup of very black, very strong coffee at precisely 1:15 a.m. every shift. Her unit, the medical surgical floor, was typically a place of managed chaos post-op recoveries, pneumonia cases, the routine ebb and flow of human ailment. The week of October 17th was different. The floor was unusually quiet, with a census of only 8 patients. According to the staffing log and her own personal journal, which was later entered into evidence, this is when the events began. The incident report filed by Nurse Petrova states that the first anomaly was auditory. It was 2:47 a.m. She was at the central nurses station, completing charting. The only sounds were the hum of the computers and the distant, rhythmic whoosh of a ventilator from room 312. Then, clearly, she heard the call bell from room 307. A soft, polite chime. Room 307 was vacant. It had been for 3 days, following the discharge of a Mr. Henderson. The housekeeping checklist was signed off. The bed was stripped. The door was closed. Anya stood, walked down the hall, and opened the door. The room was dark, sterile, and empty. She checked the call bell plug at the wall. It was disconnected, lying on the bare mattress. She plugged it back in, reset it at the wall, and left. She noted the event as a possible electrical fault in her log. The following night, the phenomenon escalated. At 3:03 a.m., the call bell from 307 sounded again. This time, Anya asked a nursing assistant, a young man named Leo, to accompany her. Both their signed testimonies confirm what they found. The room was, again, empty, but the call bell plug was once more lying unplugged on the bed. Furthermore, the room was cold, a sharp, penetrating cold that seemed centered on the bed itself. The thermostat read 62 degrees Fahrenheit, while the hallway was a constant 72. Leo would later tell investigators he felt a pressure in the room, like a headache forming behind his eyes. They unplugged the bell entirely and took the handset back to the station. The buildup of events was meticulous and documented in shift change reports. The next occurrence was visual. Anya was passing room 307 on her rounds. The door was closed. From the narrow gap at the bottom, she saw a shadow break the line of light from the hall. Something inside the room had moved close to the door. She froze. Hospital policy dictated she check any occupied room, but the system clearly showed 307 as vacant. She placed her hand on the door handle. It was ice cold. She opened the door. The room was empty, the bed still bare, but the window, which she always kept locked, was open about 2 inches. A cold autumn breeze was lifting the thin curtain. She closed and locked it, her clinical mind wrestling with the impossibility. The window latch required significant manual force to open from the inside. The reveal came 2 nights later. The floor had received a new admission, patient needing isolation for a suspected infection. Room 307 was the only appropriate room available. Anya, despite her deep misgivings documented in her notes, prepared the room herself. She assisted in transferring the patient, an elderly woman named Marjorie, into the bed. Vital signs were stable. At 4:30 a.m., Marjorie's heart monitor alarm sounded at the station, a brief episode of tachycardia. Anya went to check. She entered room 307 to find Marjorie awake, eyes wide, pointing a trembling finger toward the corner of the room near the bathroom. Marjorie stated, and this is quoted directly from her patient chart, "The tall man in the corner. He's been watching me since you left. He wants the bed." Anya saw nothing. She calmed Marjorie, assuming it was hospital delirium. But as she turned to leave, the call bell at the bedside, the very one she had reinstalled, chimed. Not the button for the nurse, but the button for the bathroom. A request for assistance to the restroom, which Marjorie was physically incapable of doing on her own. Anya looked at Marjorie. The old woman shook her head, terrified. "I didn't touch it." The aftermath and verification are drawn from the official hospital incident report and the subsequent police wellness check. Anya left the room, called security, and requested an immediate room change for Marjorie. When security and the night supervisor arrived, they entered room 307. Marjorie was alone, but on the bare wall opposite the bed, written in a faint, greasy substance, later identified as hospital-grade petroleum jelly, was a single word: out. The writing was at a height of approximately 7 feet from the floor. No ladder or stool was found in the room. Marjorie was transferred. Room 307 was taken out of service for renovations. Anya Petrova requested a permanent transfer to the day shift, which was granted. The hospital's internal review, a copy of which was obtained through a former employee, could find no evidence of a prank or malfunction. It was listed as unexplained environmental phenomena. To this day, Anya does not drink coffee after midnight, and Cedar Ridge Community Hospital still lists room 307 as a storage closet for housekeeping supplies. Maintenance workers assigned to that wing have independently reported tools going missing and a persistent, localized cold spot in that corridor, a detail corroborated by 3 separate janitorial staff members in signed statements. The locked ward on the 4th floor. Liam Chen was a travel nurse, a man who prized efficiency and evidence. At 32, he took assignments based on the technology of the hospital. He preferred facilities with modern, integrated electronic health records and secure access systems. His assignment at St. Ignatius Hospital, an older brick building in a decaying city center, was a last-minute fill-in for a 13-week night shift stint in the cardiac telemetry unit. The building was a maze of additions, with the original 1,922nd structure still forming its core. According to his orientation paperwork and his own personal log, he was warned on his first day. The 4th floor, the old psychiatric wing, was permanently locked. It had been shuttered since the 1980s. The access card system would not grant entry. He was told it was for asbestos containment. The inciting incident was a logistical error, recorded in the hospital's electronic medication administration record. On November 8, at 1:20 a.m., a medication alert pinged for a patient named J. Smith in room 408. Liam's tablet showed it was a scheduled diuretic. Room 408 did not compute. His unit occupied the 2nd floor. The 4th floor was non-operational. He called the pharmacy, assuming a glitch. The pharmacist, according to the phone log Liam kept, confirmed the order was in the system but said, That's weird. It's tagged to the old wing. Must be a database ghost. I'll delete it. Liam dismissed it. An hour later, a new alert. A stat request for a respiratory therapy consult to room 412, followed by a bed alarm from room 415. The buildup was a cascade of digital ghosts. Over the next week, Liam's tablet would sporadically light up with alerts from the 4th floor: a code blue, a call light, a request for patient transport. Each time, he would report it to the charge nurse, an older woman named Brenda who had worked at St. Ignatius for 40 years. Her response, as noted in Liam's contemporaneous journal, was always the same: a tight smile and, "The system's old. It picks up phantom signals. Ignore it." But Liam, being methodical, began to monitor the 4th floor on the security camera feed at the nurse's station. The screen for that floor showed a long, dark hallway, empty and still. Every time an alert sounded on his tablet, he would glance at the feed. Nothing changed. Then, on November 14th, the nature of the alerts shifted. At 3:17 a.m., his tablet displayed a direct text message via the hospital's internal system. The sender ID was Arndt Griffin, 4th. The message read, "Need assistance with restrained patient in 404. Becoming agitated." No nurse named Griffin was in the staff directory. Liam showed Brenda. For the first time, he saw genuine unease cross her face. She picked up the phone and called security, asking them to do a physical sweep of the 4th floor perimeter. Security's radio response, which Liam overheard, was, "All doors secured. No activity." But as the security guard said it, Liam was looking at the camera feed. For a fraction of a second, the screen flickered. When the image stabilized, the door to room 404 at the far end of the hall was visibly ajar, a stark black slit against the white doorframe. He pointed. Brenda looked at the monitor, then briskly turned it off. "Don't look at that," she said. "It's bad for morale." The reveal was forced by Liam's own curiosity. 2 nights later, after Brenda had gone on break, he went to the service elevator bank. There was an old, manual freight elevator that, according to a faded floor plan, he found in a storage room, connected to all floors. His access card did not work on its panel, but he found that the "for" button, when pressed and held for 10 seconds, lit up. The elevator, with a shuddering groan, descended to his level and opened. The interior was a cage of scuffed steel. He rode it to the 4th floor. The doors opened not onto a hallway, but into a small, dusty equipment alcove. A heavy, metal fire door with a wire-reinforced window blocked the way to the main ward. Through the grimy glass, he could see the long corridor he'd seen on camera. It was not empty. Chairs lined the walls. Gurneys sat parked at odd angles. But it was the air that struck him. It smelled of stale linen, antiseptic, and something else, something metallic and old. And then he saw the light. A soft, green glow emanating from a room halfway down the hall. Room 412. The source became clear as his eyes adjusted. An old cardiac monitor, its screen alive with a steady, green tracing of a heartbeat. It was plugged into the wall. As he watched, the rhythmic spike on the screen faltered, then flatlined into a steady beam. At that exact moment, his pocket vibrated. His personal cell phone, which had no service in the hospital basement, displayed a single bar of signal. A notification popped up, an email. The sender was the hospital's automated system. The subject, "Discharge summary for patient in 412. The body of the email was blank. The aftermath and verification come from Liam's formal report to the travel nursing agency and the subsequent OSHA inquiry he triggered. He immediately took the elevator down, left the hospital, and did not return for his next shift. His agency reassigned him. He filed a complaint about unsafe working conditions due to malfunctioning equipment and potential biohazards on an uncontrolled floor. The OSHA report, obtained through a public records request, shows inspectors visited St. Ignatius. They confirmed the 4th floor was not properly sealed, citing several code violations for electrical and environmental hazards. They noted the presence of legacy medical equipment still connected to active power mains. The hospital was fined, but the chilling, unresolved detail lies in the footnotes of that report. An inspector's note states that during their sweep, They found evidence of recent foot traffic in the dust of the fourth floor corridor, and in room 412, the cardiac monitor was still on. Its screen showed not a flat line, but a slow, regular, and perfect sinus rhythm. When the inspector unplugged the machine, the tracing continued for a full 27 seconds before finally fading to black, a physical impossibility for the unit's capacitor design. The hospital administration stated the machine was defective. Liam Chen no longer accepts assignments in hospitals built before 1990. He has also changed his personal email address after continuing to receive blank, automated discharge summaries from STT. Ignatius every year on the anniversary of his visit, emails the hospital's IT department insists were never sent. The hydration schedule. Maya Santos was a pediatric night shift nurse at the Sunnyvale Children's Hospital, a facility known for its bright murals and cheerful staff. At 29, she was deeply empathetic, known for her ability to soothe the most distressed child with a story or a silly voice. Her particular charge on this rotation, documented in the nursing assignment sheet for the week of March 10th, was a 5-year-old boy named Eli in room 218. Eli was recovering from a complicated appendectomy. He was shy, quiet, and clung to a well-worn stuffed rabbit named Blue. His vital signs were stable. His recovery textbook. The only oddity, noted in the intake form by the day shift, was that Eli was an extremely sound sleeper. He never woke for routine checks or vitals. The inciting incident was a matter of clinical routine. At 2:00 a.m., Maya entered room 218 to administer Eli's scheduled intravenous antibiotics. The room was dark, lit only by the soft glow of the hallway light from the partially open door. Eli was asleep, curled around Blue. As Maya hung the new 4 bag, she noted the nearly empty bag of maintenance fluids, a simple saline drip to keep him hydrated. The rate was slow, steady. She finished her task and quietly left. At 4:00 a.m., during her next round, she entered to check Eli's vitals. She stopped in the doorway. The bag of maintenance fluids, which should have been nearly half empty by now, was full. The drip chamber showed no evidence of flow. The line was not kinked. The pump, however, was still quietly whirring, its digital screen displaying the correct rate. Perplexed, she checked the foresight. It was patent, no swelling. She restarted the pump. It beeped a confirmation and the fluid began to drip. She attributed it to a momentary pump error and noted it in the chart. The buildup was a series of small, persistent contradictions. The following night, the same thing happened. The hydration bag remained inexplicably full between checks. Maya swapped out the pump for a new one from the supply closet. The phenomenon repeated. Then, she began to notice the water pitcher on Eli's bedside table. It was always full to the brim with ice water, condensation beading on the plastic. She knew the day shift filled it, but Eli never touched it. She asked him in the morning. In a soft voice, he told her, "The other nurse gives me sips." At night, Maya checked the staffing roster. No other nurse was assigned to Eli. She assumed he was dreaming or confused from the anesthesia, but a seed of doubt was planted. She decided to test a hypothesis. Before leaving the room at 2:30 a.m., she made a tiny, almost invisible mark with a permanent pen at the fluid level on the hydration bag. She then turned off the room light completely, leaving only the dim power lights of the equipment. She closed the door most of the way, leaving a crack, and took up a position in a vacant room across the hall where she could observe Eli's door while catching up on charting. For an hour, nothing. The corridor was silent. Then, at 3:45 a.m., the night vision of her instincts sharpened. She heard it, not from Eli's room, but from the nurse's station down the hall, the soft, distinctive squeak of the wheels on the hydration cart. It was a sound she made a dozen times a night, but no one was scheduled to change hydration bags at that hour. She stood, peering down the hall. The cart was stationary at the station, yet the squeaking continued, growing slowly closer, a rhythmic, rolling sound moving down the hallway toward her. It stopped outside Eli's room. Maya held her breath. She saw the door to room 218 swing inward, silently, as if pushed by a gentle hand. From her angle, she could see a slice of the room. In the darkness, she saw the silhouette of a figure, tall and slender, leaning over Eli's for pull. There was a soft click, the sound of a new bag being spiked. Then the figure straightened and seemed to turn toward the door, toward Maya's vantage point. Maya's blood went cold. She stepped back into the shadows of the vacant room. When she dared to look again, the hallway was empty. Eli's door was ajar, exactly as she had left it. The reveal was in the clinical evidence. Heart pounding, Maya waited 5 minutes, then entered room 218. Eli was asleep, breathing evenly. Blue the rabbit was tucked under his arm. She went straight to the 4 bag. Her pen mark was gone. The bag was brand new, full, with the fresh lot number and expiration date sticker that did not match the hospital's current stock. The old bag was gone. On the bedside table, the water pitcher was full of fresh ice cubes, crackling slightly. And then she saw it. On the floor by the bed, illuminated by the glow of the monitor, was a small, damp circle on the linoleum. A single drop, then a short trail of them, leading from the bed to the door. They weren't water. They were dark, almost black in the low light. She touched one with her gloved finger. It was slick, cold. She lifted her finger to the light. It was a clear, viscous fluid. It smelled of rubbing alcohol and something else, something coppery and sweet. The aftermath and verification are documented in an incident report filed by Maya and the subsequent confidential review by the hospital's risk management team. Security was called. They found no unauthorized personnel in the building. The strange 4 bag was confiscated. Lab analysis, a copy of which was leaked to a nursing forum and later corroborated by a lab tech, revealed the bag contained a sterile saline solution, but of a proprietary formula discontinued by the hospital's supplier in 2001. The viscous drops on the floor were unidentifiable, but contained trace epithelial cells that did not match Eli, Maya, or anyone in the hospital's employee DNA database. Eli was discharged without further incident. His parents reported no strange behavior, but in the discharge paperwork, under patient comments, Eli had dictated a note to the day shift nurse. "Tell the tall nurse thank you for the drinks." His hands were very cold. Maya Santos transferred to an outpatient clinic. The official hospital memo stated the incident was a case of supply chain error and probable sleep-deprived hallucination. However, the floor's inventory system continued to show discrepancies for years after exactly 1 extra bag of pediatric fluids would appear in the stock count every month, always with outdated lot numbers. And to this day, veteran night nurses at Sunnyvale warn new hires never to ignore the sound of squealing wheels in an empty hall, especially near room 218, which has since been converted into a supply room. They report that the hydration cart is often found parked outside its door in the morning, despite being locked in the utility closet at the start of every shift. The radio in the ambulance bay. Ben Carter was an night shift nurse, a man built for controlled chaos. At 38, he thrived on the adrenaline of trauma bays and the rapid-fire diagnostics of the emergency department. St. Luke's County Hospital was a Level 2 trauma center, and its ambulance bay was his domain after midnight. He was known for 2 things: his unparalleled skill at starting IVs on patients in shock, and his habit of listening to a vintage police scanner he kept on the triage desk. It was tuned to the local EMS dispatch frequency, a crackling backdrop of coordination and crisis. The scanner, according to equipment logs, was his personal property, a relic from his days as a volunteer firefighter. The inciting incident was an auditory anomaly on that scanner. It was a slow Tuesday, just past AM. The air was quiet, with only 2 patients waiting for lab results. Ben was restocking a crash cart. The scanner hissed with empty static. Then a voice broke through. It was a male voice, calm but strained, with the professional flatness of a seasoned paramedic. "St. Luke's, this is Medic 14. We are inbound with a 65-year-old male. Full cardiac arrest. CPR in progress. ETA 7 minutes. Ben straightened up. He hadn't heard an ambulance dispatched. He checked the computer-aided dispatch terminal. No incoming units were listed. He walked to the bay doors and looked out. The parking area was empty, silent under the orange sodium lights. He keyed the mic for the hospital's own coms. Dispatch, STT. Luke sir, confirm inbound medic 14? The dispatcher's voice came back, puzzled. Negative, STT. Luke's. No units en route to you. You're clear. Ben wrote it off as a cross-frequency transmission, ghost from another county. But 7 minutes later, almost to the second, the automatic doors to the ambulance bay hissed open. No ambulance arrived. Just a rush of cold night air. And on his scanner, the same voice returned, now tinged with desperation. STT. Luke's. Medic 14. Patient is coding again. We're losing him. ETA 1 minute. Ready your trauma team. Ben's training overrode his confusion. He called out to the other nurse and the tech, mobilizing for a potential arrival. They gathered at the bay door. No lights appeared on the access road. No siren. The scanner went silent. Then, a final transmission. The voice now a hollow whisper, drained of all hope. He's gone. Don't bother. The buildup occurred over the next several shifts. The scanner would again fall silent for hours. Then the voice would return, always identifying as Medic 14. The scenarios varied. A multi-vehicle accident with multiple critical patients, a pediatric drowning, industrial accident. Each call was detailed, professional, and horrifyingly plausible. Each time, Ben would check the dispatch system. Nothing. Each time, the ETA given would pass with no arrival. The other staff began to joke about Ben's imaginary friends. But the jokes were tense, uneasy. He started logging the transmissions in a notepad, noting times and medical details. The pattern he found was unsettling. The injuries described often matched the types of cases STT. Luke's had been famous for handling decades prior, before the new highway diverted traffic away. Then, the transmissions began to interact. One night, as the voice described a severe burn victim, it added, Ben, have the silver sulfadiazine ready and the large bore line kit. He's a hard stick. Ben froze. The scanner had never used his name. He had never given it over the air. The next night, the voice said, the doors are sticking again. Tell maintenance the hydraulic fluid on bay door 3 is low. Ben checked. It was. The reveal was physical. After a particularly gruesome description of a construction site collapse, the voice signed off with, we're here. At that moment, all the floodlights in the ambulance bay died, plunging the area into near darkness. The only light came from the, behind him, and then he saw it, not with his eyes, but as a shape against the lesser darkness, the outline of an old-style box ambulance, like those used in the 1970s, parked silently in bay 3. No engine sound, no headlights, just a black silhouette. As he watched, two dark figures appeared to move with choreographed urgency, pulling a stretcher from the back. They rushed toward the doors, which did not open. They passed straight through the closed doors, the stretcher and all, vanishing into the wall. Ben ran inside. The was calm. The charge nurse looked up. You see a ghost? She asked. He didn't answer. He went to the trauma bay the figures had moved toward. It was empty, clean, prepared. But the room was freezing, and on the freshly mopped floor, leading from the wall to the center of the room, was a set of wet tire tracks, narrow and twin-ribbed, the exact tread pattern of an old ambulance gurney wheel. They ended abruptly in the middle of the floor. The aftermath and verification stemmed from Ben's research and a declassified memo from the hospital's founding board. He spent his days off in the local historical society archives. He found a microfiche news article from November 12, 1978. A STT, Luke's ambulance, designated Medic 14, was responding to a major factory fire. It swerved to avoid a civilian car and crashed into a telephone pole en route to the hospital. Both paramedics and the critical patient they were transporting were killed instantly. The crash site was less than a mile from the hospital. The article named the paramedics, Frank Davies and Richard Cole. Ben Carter stopped bringing his scanner to work. He eventually left the for a managerial position. The official stance from STT, Luke's administration was that old wiring in the bay caused light failures and that Ben was experiencing auditory pareidolia hearing patterns and static. But the memo from 1979, discovered by Ben, told a different story. It was a directive from the hospital director to cease all use of the designation Medic 14 for future units due to staff superstition following the tragic accident. Furthermore, maintenance work orders from the 1980s repeatedly note the failure of Bay Door 3's hydraulics, citing persistent, unexplained fluid leaks. The tread marks never reappeared, but night security guards and newer nurses report that sometimes when the bay is empty and quiet, the automatic doors will suddenly cycle open and closed, as if making room for something to pass. And on the rare night when a real cardiac arrest case arrives, with a similar presentation to the 1978 factory fire victims, veterans say the old silver sulfadiazine cream is sometimes found already laid out on the trauma bay counter, though no one remembers placing it there. The hallway monitor. Sophie Williams was a night shift nurse in the long-term care wing of Briarwood Estates, a facility that sat on the outskirts of a quiet town. At 55, she was the senior nurse on the floor, known for her endless patience with the residents, many of whom suffered from advanced dementia. Her routine was sacred. She knew every creak of the floorboards, every pattern of breathing from the 20 rooms on her hall. The wing was a place of soft sounds and gentle routines, punctuated by the soft glow of night lights and the digital chirp of the central nursing station's monitor, which displayed a silent, black and white feed of the hallway from a single, ceiling-mounted camera. The inciting incident was a glitch in that feed. On the night of September 8th, at approximately 1:30 a.m., Sophie was documenting the vitals for Mr. Jenkins in room 12. The hallway monitor at her desk, always showing the long, empty corridor with its patterned carpet and closed doors, flickered. For 3 seconds, the image changed. It showed the hallway from the same angle, but it was daytime. Sunlight streamed through the windows. At the far end, a housekeeper was pushing a cart. A resident Sophie didn't recognize was walking slowly with a walker. Then it snapped back to the familiar nighttime view. Sophie blinked, attributing it to a brief satellite signal interference. Though the system was hardwired, she made a note to mention it to IT. She did not mention the cold dread that settled in her stomach when she saw the walking resident, a woman in a floral housecoat, who had looked directly up at the camera and smiled with a mouth that seemed, in that fleeting glimpse, to have too many teeth. The buildup was a quiet unraveling of reality. The flickers became more frequent, always showing the same daytime scene, but progressing. The housekeeper would be in a different position. The floral housecoat woman would be closer to the camera each time. Sophie began to keep a log, noting the time and the progression. According to her handwritten log, which was later found in her locker, the woman in the monitor moved with an impossible speed between flickers, covering yards and seconds of real time. No one else on shift saw it. The flickers lasted less than 5 seconds, and seemed to coincide with moments when Sophie was alone at the station. Then, the monitor began to show the night, but not her night. It would show the hallway empty, then the door to room 7, Mrs. Gable's room, would be open. In reality, it was closed. Sophie would get up to check, finding it securely shut. Minutes later, the monitor would show room 7E's door closed, but room 9E's open. It was a silent, visual taunt. She began to distrust her own eyes, staring at the real hallway and then at the monitor, watching them show contradictory information. She called the facility's on-call maintenance man. He found no issues with the camera or the feed. He told her, his statement later recorded in a work order, "Maybe you need some time off, Sophie. The night can play tricks." The final straw was auditory. During one of the daytime flickers, the monitor's silent feed was accompanied by a burst of sound from the station's dusty speaker, a snippet of a big band song from the 1940s, tinny and distorted, overlaid with the sound of the floral housecoat woman laughing. The laugh was high, girlish, and utterly without warmth. It ended the moment the image reverted to the normal night feed. That was when Sophie noticed the first physical change in her reality. Walking the hall after the laugh, she saw that the pattern in the carpet near room 10 seemed to swirl slightly, as if the fibers were trying to form a shape. The next night, one of the generic landscape paintings on the wall was different. The bucolic farm scene now included a tiny, smiling figure in a floral dress standing in the distant field, facing the viewer. The reveal happened when the two realities collided. It was the monitor flickered. This time, it showed the nighttime hallway, but from a different perspective, as if the camera had been moved to the far end, pointing toward the nurse's station. And sitting at Sophie's desk, in her chair, was the woman in the floral housecoat, her back to the camera. Sophie was physically standing in the real hallway, looking at the empty station. Her blood turned to ice. On the monitor, the woman slowly turned her head, as if to look over her shoulder at the camera. At that exact moment, Sophie heard, from the very real hallway around her, the distinct, shuffling step slide of someone in house slippers coming from the direction of room 15. She spun. The hallway was empty. She looked back at the monitor. The woman at the desk was gone. The feed now showed the normal angle, and in the center of the hallway, halfway between the station and the rooms, stood the woman, full front, facing the camera. Her face was a smudge of pale pixels, but her smile was a dark, wide gash. She raised a hand and pointed, not at the camera, but down the hall to her right toward room 7, Mrs. Gable's room. Sophie's training overrode her terror. She ran to room 7 and threw open the door. Mrs. Gable, a frail woman with end-stage Alzheimer's, was sitting bolt upright in bed, which she never did. She was staring at the corner of the room, her mouth working silently. Her heart monitor, which had been stable, was beginning to shriek a high-pressure alarm. Sophie rushed to her side, hitting the code button. As she stabilized Mrs. Gable, she followed the old woman's fixed gaze to the corner. There, on the wallpaper, a damp patch had formed. It was spreading, bleeding into the pattern of roses, morphing it into the distinct shape of a woman in a flowing, floral housecoat. The aftermath and verification are contained in the incident report and the subsequent, hushed changes to the facility. Mrs. Gable was stabilized but passed away peacefully 2 nights later, a fact noted in the mortality log. Sophie took a 2-week leave of absence. When she returned, the monitor at the nurse's station had been replaced with a simpler system that showed no continuous feed. The original camera, according to a work order, was found to be non-functional and internally corroded, consistent with water damage, though it was in a climate-controlled hallway. The facility director dismissed Sophie's account as stress-induced hallucination, a conclusion written into her personnel file. But the verification lies in the patterns. A night nurse who replaced Sophie, a skeptical young man named David, kept his own notes. He reported that several residents with late-stage dementia, who had no way of communicating with each other, would all become agitated at the same time each night 3 a.m. They would all point to the corners of their rooms. Furthermore, the new, generic artwork that replaced the altered landscape painting was found, on 3 separate mornings, to have shifted on the wall, tilting to point toward room 7. The final, chilling detail is known only to the cleaning staff. They report that no matter how thoroughly they scrub it, the carpet near room 10 always feels slightly damp to the touch in the morning, and the fibers never quite lay flat, perpetually forming a subtle, swirling pattern that some say looks like a flowing dress. The post-op vital sheet. Elena Mendez was a surgical recovery nurse at the state-of-the-art Ridgeview Medical Center. She was 30, precise, and took immense pride in her unit's near-perfect patient outcomes. Her world was one of data, blood pressure, oxygenation, temperature, output. Every shift, she meticulously filled out the post-operative vital sign sheets, green-colored papers that hung on clipboard at the foot of each patient's bed. The routine was algorithmic, a dance of numbers that told the story of healing. That is, until the sheet for patient John Doe in Recovery Bay 4. The inciting incident was a single, anomalous number. It was 2:00 a.m. following a major thoracic surgery. The patient, a John Doe brought in from a car accident, was stable but critical, intubated and sedated. Elena recorded his vitals every 15 minutes. At 2:15, his core temperature, taken via a reliable Foley catheter probe, read 98.6 perfectly normal. At 2:30, she recorded it again, 98.6 but as she went to hang the clipboard, her eye caught the previous entry. The number 98 6 she had written at to 15 was gone. In its place, written in an identical shade of hospital blue ink, in handwriting that was nearly a perfect copy of her own, was 96. 2. A significant, hypothermic drop she would have immediately acted upon. She stared, confused. She checked the electronic monitor at the bedside, which logged data automatically. Its log showed 98.6 at both 2:15 and 2:30. The patient's skin felt warm. She circled the anomalous 96.2 on the sheet, wrote "monitor discrepancy," and initialed it, assuming she had made a bizarre copying error. The buildup was a war of records. Over the next hour, the vital sheet began to diverge from reality. The handwritten record would show a sudden, brief spike in blood pressure that the electronic monitor did not reflect. The sheet would note a change in ventilator settings that had not been made. Elena began to take photos of the sheet with her phone after each entry, time-stamped evidence. She showed them to the charge nurse, who shrugged and said, "The paper is just a backup. Trust the computers." But Elena didn't, because the changes on the paper started to precede the changes on the monitor. She would record a stable heart rate of 75. 5 minutes later, she would look at the sheet and see it now read 82 and rising, and as she watched, the electronic monitor would begin to tick upward from 75 to match it, as if the paper was dictating reality. Then, the notes section began to fill. At the bottom of the vital sheet was a space for nursing comments. Elena never used it for this patient, as his care was strictly protocol-driven. But words began to appear. First, cold. Then, can't wake up. Then, in a script that was now becoming looser, less like her own, they're waiting in the walls. Elena reported this to the on-call surgeon, who ordered a full metabolic panel and a brain scan, suspecting a silent neurological event. All tests returned normal. The surgeon told Elena his statement, later paraphrased in the patient's chart, to stop focusing on the paper and focus on the patient. The reveal was in the final entry. At 4:45 a.m., the patient's condition on the vital sheet had deteriorated catastrophically. The handwritten record showed a plunging blood pressure, a soaring temperature, and a heart rate in dangerous arrhythmia. The electronic monitors, however, showed a patient in stable, if critical, condition. The comment section now contained a single, sprawling sentence. "They cut too deep and let the wrong thing out." Below it, as if a signature, was a symbol, a crude drawing of an eye inside a triangle. Elena, against all protocol, but driven by a certainty that chilled her bones, made a decision. She took a brand new vital sheet from the supply room. She meticulously transcribed the true numbers from the electronic monitor onto the clean sheet. She then walked to Bay 4, and with the charge nurse watching, she removed the old, cursed sheet from the clipboard. As she did, the patient's real monitors suddenly blared. The heart rhythm spiraled into ventricular fibrillation. A code blue was called. For 12 frantic minutes, the team worked on John Doe. Elena, acting as Med's nurse, was a whirlwind of precision. They got him back. As the adrenaline faded and the stable rhythm returned to the screen, Elena looked at the clipboard in her hand. The old vital sheet was gone. In her grip was a blank piece of green paper. The charge nurse confirmed she saw Elena remove a filled-out sheet, but could not explain its disappearance. The aftermath and verification is a case study in institutional memory. John Doe was transferred to the ICU and eventually recovered, though he had no memory of the event or his past. The official report on the code blue cited a sudden, unexplained cardiac event, with no reference to the vital sheet. Elena's photos of the anomalous sheet had all been corrupted, showing only blurry, gray static. Ridgeview's IT security found no evidence of a hack on the patient monitoring system, but the verification is oral, passed down in the recovery unit. The symbol, the eye in the triangle, was recognized by an older nurse who had worked at a hospital that was torn down to build Ridgeview. She said it was the unofficial logo of a secretive surgical society that had operated there in the 1950s, a group rumored to have experimented on patients in twilight states. Furthermore, a janitor found something while cleaning the ceiling tiles in Recovery Bay 4 during renovations a year later. Tucked above the tiles, dry and brittle, was a stack of decades-old, green-colored post-op vital sheets. Everyone was for a John Doe, and everyone showed perfect, steady vitals that terminated abruptly at the 4:45 a.m. entry, with the final comment block filled with the same frantic, handwritten text. They cut too deep. Elena Mendez now works in outpatient surgery, where the records are entirely digital. She has a single, non-negotiable rule. She never, ever uses green paper. The visitor log. Tom Haddad worked the night shift in the neuro-intensive care unit at University Hospital. At 40, he was a stoic man, comfortable with the profound silence that often accompanied severe brain injuries. His patients were frequently unresponsive, their fates written in the jagged lines of EEGs and the numbers on intracranial pressure monitors. Protocol was strict, especially regarding visitation. After PM, only immediate family with pre-approved badges were allowed, and they had to sign a detailed log at the security desk downstairs. The log recorded name, patient visited, time in, time out, and a driver's license number. Tom's shift began at PM, by which time the unit was always empty of visitors, a silent, blue-lit cathedral of machinery. The inciting incident was a signature. During his first round at 11:30 p.m., Tom would always check the visitor log binder that security sent up at the end of visiting hours. On the night of June 5th, the last log entry was for a M. Vickers visiting patient Daniel Shaw in bed 3. Time in, 7:45 p.m. Time out, blank. The license number field was also blank. Annoyed, thinking security had been lax, Tom called down. The security guard, a man named Ray, checked his own copy of the log. His voice, recorded on the unit's call system, was firm. My sheet shows M. Vickers signed out at 8:30. License number is there too. You must have a bad photocopy. Tom shrugged, wrote 8:30 in the blank space, and initialed it. He then began his first neurological checks on Mr. Shaw, a comatose 30-year-old with a traumatic brain injury from a fall. His pupils were sluggish but equal. His pressure was stable. As Tom shined his pen light, he noted something he hadn't before. A faint, reddish mark on the patient's right wrist, like a recent, thin burn or a pressure mark from a tight band. It wasn't in the day shift notes. He documented it. The buildup was a series of inconsistencies centered on the log and the patient. The next night, the log entry for M. Vickers was there again. Time in, 7:50 p.m. Time out, blank. No license. This time, Tom went to security in person during his break to compare sheets. Ray's log showed a complete entry, signed out at 8:28 p.m. with a valid Washington state license. Tom's sheet was from the same printer, but the out time and license were missing, as if the ink had never been laid down. More disturbing was the patient. Daniel Shaw's neurological readings were unchanged, but the mark on his wrist was darker, now clearly a pattern. 2 parallel lines with a squiggled line between them, like a crude symbol. Tom photographed it. When he lifted the patient's hand to examine it further, the arm was stiff, resistant, as if with rigor, which was physiologically impossible for a living patient. The moment passed, and the arm became flaccid again. The following night, a new name appeared on Tom's log. Below Vickers, A. Silas for patient Maria Chen in bed 6. Time in, 7:55 p.m. Time out, blank. No license. Tom checked bed 6. Miss Chen was an elderly stroke victim, unresponsive. On her ankle was a new, faint bruise in the same strange symbol. Tom began a separate, personal log. He requested the security camera footage for the neuro-eco hallway from PM to PM. The footage, reviewed with the security supervisor, showed the hallway empty of any visitors during that entire period. The door from the secure elevator never opened. Yet the security desk sign and log, a physical book with carbon copies, clearly showed the signatures. The signatures, when analyzed by hospital administration, were found to be written with the type of ink that was not used by any pen in the hospital. The reveal was triggered by a change in the patient's data. Daniel Shaw's intracranial pressure began to show subtle, rhythmic dips every night at exactly 3:03 a.m., a pattern not associated with any known pathology. It looked like a pulse, but slower. Maria Chen's EEG, normally a flat line of deep coma, began to show bursts of complex, organized activity during these same early morning hours, brainwaves consistent with intense conversation or problem solving, not sleep. It was as if the visitors were conducting unseen sessions. Tom decided to stay in the unit on his night off, with permission from a sympathetic charge nurse, to observe from the secluded medication room which had a window into the main bay. He watched the clock. At 3:03 a.m., the overhead lights in the neuro-EQ dimmed, a phenomenon the hospital engineer later said was impossible on that circuit. In the sudden half-light, Tom saw them. Two figures, tall and indistinct, were standing at the foot of beds 3 and 6. They were not touching the patients. They were not moving. They simply stood, facing the head of the beds. A low, whispering hum seemed to fill the air, a sound Tom felt in his teeth more than heard. He saw the digital readout for Shaw's intracranial pressure begin its rhythmic dip. He saw Chen's EEG screen light up with frantic activity. Then, one of the figures at bed 3 turned its head. It did not turn to look at Tom. It turned to look at the other figure at bed 6, as if they were communicating. After exactly 7 minutes, the lights returned to normal. The figures were gone. The aftermath and verification is a confidential chapter in the hospital's risk management files. Tom submitted a formal, detailed report. The hospital's response was to install a new, digital fingerprint scanner for after-hours visitation, and to retire the paper log entirely. The official reason was security modernization. Daniel Shaw and Maria Chen showed no medical improvement, but their respective anomalous symptoms, the pressure dips and the EEG bursts, ceased immediately and never returned. The marks on their skin faded within days, but the verification lies in the evidence Tom collected before the system changed. His photograph of the symbol on Shaw's wrist was analyzed by a cultural anthropology professor at the affiliated university. The professor identified it as a highly stylized, archaic symbol from Mesopotamian mythology, representing a psychopump, a conductor of souls, specifically one that guides trapped souls, those stuck between states. Furthermore, when the old paper log books were being shredded for confidentiality, a clerk noted that every single log from the neuro-ICU's inception contained, without fail, 1 or 2 entries per month with missing out times and license numbers, always for the most critically ill, unresponsive patients. The names were always different. The visiting times were always between 7:45 and 8 p.m. Tom had it transferred to the PACU, where patients are only briefly unconscious. He refuses to work in any unit where the patients cannot speak for themselves. And to this day, the night cleaning crew for the neuro-EQ insists they must clean the floors twice, once at the start of their shift, and once again at 3:30 a.m., because they always find a set of faint, dusty footprints leading from the secured elevator to the bedsides of the 2 most critical patients, footprints that were not there an hour before. The supply closet on labor and delivery. Jessie Reed was a night shift nurse on the labor and delivery unit at Mercy General, a place typically associated with joy and new beginnings. At 26, she was the youngest on the team, energetic, and beloved for her ability to calm first-time mothers. The unit was modern, brightly painted, with a central nurses' station that had a clear view of the hallway leading to the 4 delivery suites. Next to the station was a large supply closet, a rectangular room, always kept locked and accessed via keypad code known only to staff. It was stocked with everything from sterile gauze to emergency obstetric kits. The code, according to unit policy, was changed every quarter. The inciting incident was an inventory error. During a slow shift in early April, Jessie was tasked with restocking the delivery carts. She entered the code 0420, the last 4 digits of the unit's main phone number, and opened the supply closet. She gathered what she needed. As she turned to leave, her eye caught something on the bottom shelf at the very back, behind boxes of sanitary pads. It was a small, old-fashioned nursing cap, the stiff, white kind not worn by anyone in decades. It was spotlessly clean. Thinking it was a forgotten prank or a historical display item, she picked it up. Underneath it was a single, yellowed patient chart from 1961. The name was redacted. The diagnosis line read, Full-term stillbirth. Cause undetermined. Jessie felt a sudden, profound chill. She replaced the items exactly as she found them and left. When she mentioned it to the charge nurse, the older woman frowned and said, "That closet was cleaned out top to bottom last month. There was nothing like that in there." They went to check together. The shelf was empty save for the boxes of pads. The code had not been changed yet, so no one else could have entered. The buildup was a series of auditory and sensory phenomena isolated to that closet. A few nights later, while Jessie was charting at the station, she heard it. The soft, unmistakable cry of a newborn coming from inside the locked supply closet. It was brief, cut off into silence. She sat frozen. The charge nurse heard nothing. Then, Jessie began to notice the smell. Occasionally, when walking past the closet door, she would catch a whiff of a distinct, old-fashioned antiseptic Lysol and carbolic soap, a smell completely alien to the modern unit's citrus-scented cleaners. Other nurses began to comment on a cold spot right outside the closet door. The events became more intrusive. One night, a mother in room 2, who was in early labor, asked Jessie, "Who is that nurse in the old-fashioned uniform? She keeps peeking in my door." There was no such nurse. Security footage showed the hallway outside room 2 was empty at the times the mother indicated. Then, the keypad itself began to malfunction. Jessie would enter the code, the light would flash green, but the door would remain magnetically locked. This would happen repeatedly, until she would say, quietly, "Please, I just need some gauze." The lock would then click open. She never told anyone about this ritual. The reveal occurred during a true emergency. It was a busy night, with 2 active deliveries. A third mother was rushed in, a placental abruption. The baby was in distress. They needed an emergency cesarean kit, which was stored in the supply closet. Jessie ran to the door, punched in the code. Red light. She punched it again, her hands shaking. Red light. The surgeon was yelling from the room. In panic, Jessie slammed her palm against the door and hissed, "We need to save this baby. Now." The lock clicked. She threw the door open. The closet was not the closet. It was a long, tiled hallway from another time, lit by flickering fluorescent tubes. The walls were a faded green. At the far end, under a harsh light, stood a metal basin and a gurney. A woman in a 1950s era nurse's uniform, her back to Jessie, was hunched over the basin, washing something. She turned slowly. Her face was pale, drawn with a deep, timeless sorrow. In her hands, she cradled a small, silent bundle wrapped in a clean white cloth. She looked at Jessie, then down at the bundle, and shook her head slowly. Then she pointed, not at Jessie, but past her, down the imagined corridor toward the delivery room. The vision collapsed. Jessie was standing in the normal supply closet, under bright LED lights, the shelves stocked with modern supplies. On the floor in front of her, where no item should have been, sat a pristine, sealed emergency cesarean kit from a supplier that had gone out of business in the 1970s. She grabbed it and ran. The surgery was successful. Both mother and baby survived. The aftermath and verification is a mixture of official denial and undeniable artifact. Jessie reported what she saw to the unit manager. An investigation was launched. The hospital found no evidence of a hallucinogenic leak or carbon monoxide. The official conclusion was acute stress-induced dissociation. The keypad to the supply closet was replaced with a mechanical lock and key, but the verification is in the physical evidence and the unit's folklore. The vintage cesarean kit was taken by the hospital's risk management office. Its sterility seal was intact, and when opened, the instruments inside were found to be in perfect, unused condition, though of an obsolete design. Furthermore, when the old keypad was sent to the manufacturer for diagnostics, they reported that its log showed no entry attempts for the entire night of the emergency. According to the machine, the door had never been unlocked. Most chillingly, a review of archived hospital records from the 1960s revealed that the L&D unit had been the site of a terrible incident where a nurse, grief-stricken after a series of unexplained stillbirths she believed were due to hospital error, had taken her own life in a storage room. Her name was Nurse Agnes Miller. The records note she was buried with the stillborn child whose mother had abandoned it, a child she had cared for in death. Jessie Reed left labor and delivery and now works in pediatric oncology. She says she can still smell carbolic soap whenever she's very tired. And the nurses on Mercy General's night shift have an unspoken rule. You never go to the supply closet alone. And you always say thank you when you close the door. The pharmacy run. Leo was a night shift float nurse at County General, a sprawling, understaffed hospital where he was the go-to for covering breaks and handling non-critical tasks across multiple units. At 23, he was pragmatic and unflappable, his sanity preserved by noise-canceling headphones and a strict policy of focusing only on his immediate assignment. One of his regular duties was the pharmacy run for the entire West Wing, a journey that took him through a series of connected buildings via long, underground service tunnels. The route was a 15-minute round trip of fluorescent-lit concrete, punctuated by the distant rumble of the boiler room and the hum of electrical conduits. He pushed a large, rattling metal cart for the supplies. The inciting incident was a wrong turn. On the night of October 30th, Leo was behind schedule. Distracted by a text about a patient's changed medication order, he missed his usual left turn toward the main pharmacy hub. He realized his mistake after a minute, finding himself in a tunnel section he didn't recognize. The lights were older, with a few bulbs flickering or dead. The walls were unpainted cinder block, and the air was colder, smelling of damp earth and something chemical, like old ether. Annoyed, he turned to retrace his steps. That's when he saw the door. It was a heavy, metal door with a small, wired glass window set into the tunnel wall. A faded sign read, "Pharmacy NXB authorized personnel only." He'd never seen or heard of an NXB. Curiosity got the better of him. He tried the handle. It was unlocked. The buildup was a descent into an anachronism. Inside was a small, time capsule pharmacy. Wooden cabinets with glass fronts held bottles of pills with labels in elaborate, cursive script. The countertops were chipped linoleum. A single, green-shaded desk lamp provided the only light, casting long shadows. The air was still and thick with dust. Leo, thinking he'd stumbled upon a forgotten storage room, figured he might as not return empty-handed. He saw a box of the exact for antibiotics he needed on a shelf. As he lifted it, a ledger book on the counter caught his eye. It was open. The handwritten entries were dates and drug names, but the last date was November 2nd, 1978. The column for dispersing nurse was signed, over and over, in a neat hand, E. Vance. He took the antibiotics and left, closing the door firmly behind him. The cart felt heavier on the return trip. The next night, his cart was unusually heavy from the start. On his way to the pharmacy, one of the wheels began to squeak with a high, rhythmic pitch he'd never heard before. When he reached the main pharmacy, the night pharmacist looked at the box of antibiotics and frowned. "Where'd you dig these up? This manufacturer had a recall in '79. We haven't stocked this in decades." He showed Leo the modern stock. The boxes were different. Leo, unsettled, said he found them in an old storage closet. He completed his run with the correct meds. But at a.m. the following night, pushing his cart into the main tunnel, the wheel squeaked again. And as he passed the intersection where he'd gotten lost, the squeaking changed. It became a voice, faint and tinny, whispering from the axle, "NXB, NXB." Leo stopped the cart. The whispering stopped. He kept walking. The whispers returned every time the wheel made a full rotation. He abandoned the cart and finished the run on foot, carrying what he could. When he reported the malfunctioning cart and the strange room to his supervisor, he was told, according to the shift report log, "The tunnels are old. Your imagination fills in the silence. And don't go into unauthorized rooms." But Leo was a creature of evidence. He started using his phone to record audio during his walks. The recordings, which he still possesses, captured the clear, rhythmic whisper superimposed over the wheel squeak. On nights, he used that specific cart. The final piece was interactive. A week later, needing a specialized electrolyte solution, he was told the main pharmacy was out. but it might be in deep storage. On a hunch, Leo went back to the tunnel. The door to Annex B was there. This time, a dim light glowed from the window. He peered in. The room was as before, but the ledger was now closed, and a steaming mug of tea sat on the counter next to it. The hair on his neck stood up. He was about to leave when he saw it on the shelf, a box of the exact electrolyte solution he needed, with a modern, barcoded label. This was impossible. He slowly opened the door. The room was warm and smelled of tea and antiseptic. The mug was full, the tea bag still steeping. A voice, soft and elderly, spoke from the shadows behind a tall cabinet. "You can take the Solu Medrol on the second shelf, too. Ward C is about to need it." The reveal was a moment of silent understanding. Leo didn't see the speaker. He simply took the electrolyte solution and, hesitantly, the box of Solu Medrol from the indicated shelf. As he turned to go, he saw his own reflection in the dark glass of a cabinet door, and reflected behind him, sitting at the counter now, was an elderly man in a white pharmacist's coat from a bygone era, sipping from the mug. He gave Leo a small, tired smile and a nod. Leo fled. He delivered the supplies. 20 minutes later, as if on cue, a stat call came from Ward C for a patient in acute adrenal crisis. The needed medication? Solu Medrol. The aftermath and verification is buried in hospital infrastructure records. Leo refused to do the pharmacy run ever again. His supervisor, skeptical but noting his genuine distress, reassigned the duty. Leo told a veteran janitor about NXB. The old man went pale. He told Leo that Eddie Vance was the head night pharmacist who died of a sudden heart attack in the tunnels in 1978. He was found at his counter in a small, since demolished auxiliary pharmacy. He was known for always knowing what the doctors would need before they asked. A facilities work order from 1992, discovered during a digital archive migration, authorizes the sealing of the former auxiliary pharmacy access in sub-tunnel for C due to persistent moisture and mold. But the report notes the crew could not locate the described doorway, only a solid, unbroken cinder block wall at the coordinates. To this day, the metal cart with the squeaky wheel remains in service. Nurses who push it report that, on certain nights, it pulls insistently to the left at a specific junction, as if on a track. And several veteran night pharmacists have confessed, off the record, that sometimes when they are desperately searching for a discontinued or out-of-stock medication, they will find it suddenly sitting on a shelf in plain sight, with the faint smell of tea and ether lingering in the air. They call it Eddie's shift. The discharge papers. Ruth Coleman was a hospice nurse who made home visits, a calling that required a unique blend of clinical precision and profound empathy. At 60, she had seen hundreds of patients through their final journeys, and she believed in the quiet, orderly transition of a good death. Her tools were medications for comfort, a gentle voice, and a packet of paperwork that included, when the time came, the official death certificate and discharge from life forms for the funeral home. She kept these documents in a specific, leather-bound portfolio in her car. The ritual was sacred, paperwork signed, belongings noted, a final vital sign recorded as time of death. The inciting incident was a duplicate. In early February, she was attending to Mr. Alistair Finch, a terminal cancer patient, in a secluded, wood-sided house on the edge of a state forest. His passing was peaceful, expected. At 2:17 a.m., Ruth recorded the time, comforted the grieving daughter, and began her paperwork. She opened her portfolio. Inside, neatly clipped together, were two identical, complete sets of discharge papers for Mr. Finch. Every field name, diagnosis, doctor's information was filled out in her own handwriting. But she had filled out only one set. She assumed, tiredly, that she had mistakenly pre-prepared an extra. She separated them, used one, and placed the unused set in her car's back seat, to be shredded later. As she drove away, the headlights swept across the forest edge. For a moment, she saw a figure standing among the trees, tall and thin, watching the house. She dismissed it as a trick of the shadows. The buildup was a pattern of premature paperwork. A week later, she was visiting a new patient, a woman named Sarah Lowell. The woman was weak, but conversational, likely with weeks left. When Ruth opened her portfolio to update her care notes, she found, clipped behind the current charts, a completed set of discharge papers for Sarah Lowell. Time of death was filled in, February 22nd, 4:11 a.m. The attending physician's signature was a perfect replica. Ruth's blood ran cold. It was February 18th. She tore up the papers in the patient's kitchen, her hands shaking. She told no one. 4 days later, on the morning of February 22nd, she received the call. Sarah Lowell had passed away peacefully in her sleep at 4:05 a.m. The family had found her at 4:30. The time was an estimate. Ruth's destroyed papers had said 4:11. Now terrified of her own portfolio, Ruth bought a new one. She transferred only blank forms. The next week, after visiting a retired fisherman named Carl, she left the new portfolio in her car while she ran into a gas station. When she returned, the car was locked, untouched, but sitting on the passenger seat, centered neatly on the leather, was a completed death certificate for Carl. The listed cause was acute respiratory failure, which was not his primary diagnosis. The time of death was that very night, 1:00 a.m. It was p.m. Ruth drove straight back to Carl's house, inventing a reason to check his oxygen tank. He was asleep, breathing comfortably. She stayed until 1:30 a.m., watching the clock. Nothing happened. She left, feeling foolish. Carl died 3 nights later. The cause, per the official certificate signed by his doctor, a sudden, massive pulmonary embolism. The estimated time, based on when his wife found him, sometime after midnight. The reveal was not a prevention, but a confrontation. Her next patient was a young man named Jacob, dying of a rare genetic disease. He was sharp, funny, and aware of his fate. After a particularly deep conversation about what he feared came after, Ruth went to her car to get a pamphlet on grief counseling. There, on her driver's seat, was a new form. It was Jacob's, but this one was different. The time of death field was blank. The cause field simply read, choice, and in the space for attending nurse's signature was a line, as if waiting for her. A cold certainty settled over Ruth. This wasn't a prediction. It was an offering, or a request. She took the paper and walked back inside. She showed it to Jacob, whose eyes widened, then softened. "It's okay," he whispered. "I'm ready. It hurts too much." Ruth, facing an ethical abyss, did something she had never done. She sat with him, held his hand, and in her calm, steady voice, she talked him through what a peaceful, self-directed passing might look like, based on his legal right to cease treatments. She did not assist. She only presented the option he already had. He chose to go into inpatient hospice for terminal sedation. The last thing he said to her was, "Thank you for showing me the menu." The aftermath and verification exists in the liminal space of hospice care. Jacob died comfortably 2 days later in the inpatient unit. The official paperwork made no mention of Ruth's conversation. The phantom discharge paper for Jacob vanished from her car. Ruth was deeply shaken. She reported the phenomenon of the pre-filled forms to her hospice director, who suggested a mandatory leave for stress. Ruth declined, but requested a partner for all-night visits. The verification lies in the patterns noted by others. When Ruth finally retired, she confessed the story to a few colleagues. One, an older nurse named Gail, nodded slowly. She told Ruth about the old hospice legend of the clerk, a neutral entity that wasn't death itself, but a functionary of it, one that appreciated order and sought cooperation from those who walked the border. Gail also revealed that she, too, had once found a single, anomalous form for a patient who unexpectedly rallied and lived for 2 more years. The form had simply said postponed. Ruth Coleman still has her original leather portfolio. It sits empty on a shelf. But on the anniversary of Jacob's death, and sometimes on the anniversary of Mr. Finch's, she finds a single perfect autumn leaf pressed inside it, a type not native to her region. And the night nurses at the inpatient hospice unit have a whispered protocol. If a patient who has been struggling suddenly becomes calm, lucid, and asks to see the paperwork, they know the time is near, and they call the family without delay. They never ask which paperwork the patient means. The quiet ward. Mackenzie Mac Vega was a traveling ICU nurse who took a lucrative 13-week contract at Ravenswood Sanatorium, a private, long-term acute care facility that was less a hospital and more a gilded cage for the wealthy who were catastrophically ill but not dying. The facility was silent, carpeted, with art on the walls and a no-visitor policy after PM to ensure absolute rest. Mac's assignment was the secluded third-floor West Wing, known as the Quiet Ward. It housed only 4 patients, each in a private suite, each with a different, profound neurological impairment that left them non-communicative but stable. Her job was monitoring, hygiene, and the administration of feeds and medications via permanent ports. The pay was triple the normal rate, with a strict NDA. According to her contract, she was to have no contact with day shift. Her handoff was via sealed digital logs. The inciting incident was a log discrepancy. On her 3rd night, Mac was reviewing the patient vitals on the digital chart for patient number 3, a man designated only as Edison. The day shift's final entry noted, "Patient agitated during PM care. Required soft restraints for safety. Resting comfortably at shift change." But when Mac performed her first round at 11:15 p.m., Edison was not in soft restraints. The leather cuffs were unbuckled, lying neatly on the bedside table. The patient himself lay perfectly still, eyes open and fixed on the ceiling, as always. Mac rebuckled the restraints, noting the day shift must have forgotten to document removing them. An hour later, on her next round, the restraints were again unbuckled, placed neatly in the same spot. The patient had not moved. The security camera feed for the room, which she checked from the central monitor, showed only a still image of the bed. The timestamp advanced, but nothing moved. It was as if the feed was on a loop. She reported the camera glitch via the internal messaging system. The response from the anonymous floor supervisor was instant: disregard. Focus on patient care. Do not adjust restraints. The buildup was a systematic dismantling of her protocols. The other patients began to show similar, small defiance of their documented states. Patient number 1, Winters, was supposed to receive a specific nutritional formula through a gastric tube. The formula bags Mac hung would be empty in half the usual time, yet the patient's weight logs showed no change. Patient number 2, Gable, had a documented absence of corneal reflex, yet Mac would catch the faint, quick glint of the security camera's LED light reflected in Gable's eyes, as if they had just shifted. The digital logs began to auto-populate with contradictory notes. She would document a stable blood pressure for Edison, and the log would later show an addendum in a different font: patient requesting window be open. Request denied. These patients were physically incapable of speech. The environment itself began to feel complicit. The Quiet Ward's HVAC system was silent, but Mac started to hear a faint, rhythmic tapping from within the walls, a pattern of 3 quick, 2 slow. It would move, seeming to travel the length of the corridor. Outside the rooms, the generic soothing landscapes seemed to change subtly between glances. A tree would have fewer leaves. A stream would be frozen over. She took photos with her phone. When reviewed, the images were blurry, as if the camera couldn't focus on the paintings. Her own handwritten notes, which she kept as a backup, would sometimes show sentences she didn't remember writing. "They are testing the locks," or "The quiet is a held breath." The reveal came the night she broke the number 1 rule: no contact between shifts. Frustrated and sleepless, she arrived an hour early, hiding in a janitor's closet until the day shift nurse arrived. She watched through a crack in the door. The day nurse was an older woman, moving with a stiff, efficient economy. She did not go into any patient rooms. She went straight to the central computer, typed for 10 minutes, then left. The patients had not been touched. Mac, her heart hammering, went to the computer. As soon as she was alone, she pulled up the back end of the charting system. What she saw made her stomach drop. The logs for the patients were not just medical records. They were dialogue boxes. The day nurse's entries were one side of a conversation. The system's auto-populated patient responses were the other. Day nurse log, offering sunlight simulation. Duration, 2 hours. System response attributed to patient Winters: "The light is artificial. I decline. Day nurse log, presenting auditory stimulus, mountain stream. System response attributed to patient Gable. The water is too loud. It hides the tapping. Day nurse log, administering dream suppressant protocol. System response attributed to patient Edison. The restraints are unnecessary. I am not the one who is agitated. Max scrolled back. Months, years of this. These weren't patients. They were residents. And they were communicating. The treatments weren't for their bodies, but for their minds or something else. The agitation noted wasn't physical thrashing. It was some other form of activity. She looked up at the camera feed for Edison's room. On the screen, he still lay motionless. But on the back-end log open on her screen, a new system-generated entry appeared in real time, attributed to Edison. You are early, Mackenzie. And you are in the wrong chair. The aftermath and verification is contained in a lawsuit settlement with strict non-disclosure. Mac left the facility that night and never returned, forfeiting her entire contract's pay. Her lawyer, in a later sealed deposition, described her as suffering from acute paranoia and sleep deprivation. The official Ravenswood statement called it a regrettable case of a contractor misunderstanding experimental AI-assisted comfort communication software for locked-in patients, but the verification Mac obtained was physical. Before she fled, she used her phone to take a video of the back-end log for a full 5 minutes, capturing the real-time conversational entries appearing from all 4 patients, commenting on her presence, her nervousness, the temperature of the room. She also took a photo of the medication fridge. Among the bags of nutritional formula were rows of unmarked vials of a clear liquid. One vial was missing. She found it later in her own nurse's bag, placed there without her knowledge. It was analyzed anonymously by a chemist friend. It was a highly sophisticated, experimental neuroinhibitor, a chemical straitjacket with no approved medical use. The formula was patented under a Defense Department subsidiary. Mackenzie Vega now works in public health education, far from bedside care. The Ravenswood Sanatorium's third-floor West Wing is now listed in its brochures as administrative offices, but the lawsuit discovery process revealed one chilling, unsealed email from the facility director to the board. It read, "Containment remains stable. The dialogue therapy continues to be effective in managing their awareness. They still ask, every night, when they can go home." The email was dated 5 years before Mac ever set foot in the building. She still has the unmarked vial. Sometimes, in the dead of night, the message notification on her old, deactivated work phone lights up with a preview from an unknown number. It always says the same thing. Unzi. The quiet is almost over. 11 stories. 11 journeys into the silence that falls when the rest of the world sleeps. From the vacant room with the mind of its own, to the locked ward where the patients are not what they seem. We have walked halls where the past refuses to be archived, where protocol is a thin shield against the inexplicable, and where the very tools of healing, a vital sign sheet, a discharge form, a call bell, become conduits for something else entirely. A pattern emerges, verified not by speculation, but by the evidence itself. The police reports, the OSHA filings, the internal memos, and the sworn testimonies all point to a consistent, unsettling truth. The horror in these stories is rarely a specter in the classical sense. It is a violation of order. It is the system glitching. It is the data lying. It is the quiet professional, trained to trust in science and procedure, confronting an event that rewrites the rules right in front of them. Anya Petrova's call bell, Ben Carter's scanner, Maya Santos's 4-bag, Leo's pharmacy cart. These were not haunted objects. They were points of contact. Breaches in a reality we assume is stable. They are the moments where the clinical, documented world we rely on twists. These accounts tell us that the most profound fears are not born in darkness, but in the sterile light of a hallway at a M. They are rooted in the betrayal of trust in your equipment, your records, your colleagues, and the very building that is supposed to be a place of safety. The monster is not in the shadow. It is the shadow on the X-ray that shouldn't be there. It is the friendly voice on the radio when all channels are clear. It is the paperwork filled out before the event it describes. This is the core of verified nightmare. We do not deal in folklore. We deal in documented anomalies. The chilling detail is not the ghost, but the incident report that calls it unexplained environmental phenomena. The terror is not the whisper, but the security footage that shows an empty hallway when the whisper was heard. So, what do you do with this information? First, trust your instincts. If a nurse like Sophie Williams feels a cold dread from a hallway monitor, or a technician like Liam Chen sees a door ajar on a sealed floor, that instinct is a data point. In a world where the verified can be terrifying, your intuition is a critical sensor. Do not dismiss it because it lacks an easy explanation. Second, stay informed. The world is more layered, more strange, and more interconnected than we are often led to believe. These stories are fragments of a larger, hidden tapestry. This is where you take action. Subscribe to Verified Nightmare. Click that button now. Because in a world where these stories are real, where the record itself can be a source of terror, staying informed isn't just curiosity, it's a form of preparedness. We are your source for verified accounts, for the evidence behind the fear. Every new subscriber strengthens our ability to investigate deeper, to uncover more of the documented truth that lurks in the margins of the ordinary. Hit the like button on this video right now. This tells the algorithm that truth matters, that documentation matters. It helps other truth seekers, other people who feel that nagging sense that the world is not quite as it seems, find our channel and this community. And finally, comment below. Share your own experiences. Have you worked a night shift where the routine fractured? Have you encountered a record that told a story different from reality? We read every comment. Every account is a thread, and our team investigates leads that point to a larger, verifiable pattern. Your story could be the key to understanding the next great mystery. The night shift will always exist. The silence will always fall, but you are no longer in the dark. This has been verified. Nightmare. Remember, the most dangerous monsters are often the ones who look just like us, or sound just like the system, or wait patiently in the quiet until the clock strikes that lonely hour. Stay safe.